On the night of October 15, 1976, an elderly man closed his eyes for the final time and slipped into eternal sleep. There was no violence, no grand spectacle, no dramatic scene of revenge or bloodshed. His death was peaceful, unremarkable, ordinary. Yet this man was anything but ordinary. For more than 2 decades, he had commanded the most powerful crime family in America, directing an empire built on fear, money, and omerta. How could someone who appeared so unassuming, nearly invisible to the public eye, wield such tremendous influence in a world dominated by violence and betrayal? That question has haunted historians, law enforcement, and rival mobsters ever since. The answer lies in his revolutionary philosophy: discretion over bloodshed, patience over impulse, calculated authority over theatrical displays. His name was Carlo Gambino, and the dynasty that still bears his name became the most formidable criminal organization of the 20th century. Carlo Gambino's journey began far from New York's glittering skyline. He was born on August 24, 1902, in the Sicilian town of Capone, nestled among rolling hills and ancient olive groves. His father, Francesco, earned his living as a sulfur miner, a profession that was brutal, dirty, and offered little promise of advancement. Yet for the Gambino family, it provided steady, if modest, survival. His mother, Leonarda Maida, carried within her a fierce devotion to family loyalty and tradition, values she instilled in her children. Though not wealthy, the Gambinos were respected within their community, stable enough to weather the constant hardships that plagued Sicilian families. But the Sicily of Carlo's childhood was a land of stark contradictions. The island's breathtaking beauty masked a life of grinding poverty, corruption, and endemic violence. In the early 20th century, the Cosa Nostra functioned not merely as a criminal network, it operated as a shadow government. State institutions were weak and ineffective, forcing people to rely instead on the unspoken authority of men bound by omerta, the sacred code of silence. For ambitious young men like Carlo, the message was unmistakable. Official law enforcement could not protect you, but the Mafia could. Formal schools offered little opportunity, so Carlo, like many of his peers, received his true education in the streets. There, he absorbed the unwritten rules of survival, where intelligence trumped muscle and silence held more value than gold. By his late teens, Carlo Gambino had already captured the attention of local Mafia leaders. Unlike many ambitious youths, he never shouted for recognition or flaunted his toughness. Instead, he impressed older figures with his sharp intelligence, his remarkable patience, and his ability to assess dangerous situations without rushing to judgment. A pivotal moment occurred when he witnessed a neighborhood dispute. Rather than being resolved by police, it was settled discreetly by a respected local figure. This lesson struck young Carlo profoundly. True authority emanated not from loud declarations but from the ability to command respect and obedience without drawing a weapon. At just 19 years old, in 1921, Carlo Gambino was formally initiated into the Mafia. Becoming a made man at such a young age represented no small achievement. It recognized not only his unwavering loyalty but his potential as a future leader. Yet Sicily, with its limited prospects and crushing poverty, could not contain his soaring ambition. That same year, Gambino made a life-altering decision. He would seek his fortune in America. Evading immigration controls, Gambino arrived illegally in New York in 1921. Like countless other Sicilians, he gravitated toward Brooklyn, where established Mafia networks offered both opportunity and protection. He aligned himself with the D'Aquila crime family, under the leadership of Salvatore D'Aquila, one of the early power brokers of American organized crime. Here, Gambino honed his skills in the criminal underworld, engaging in extortion, loan sharking, and the thriving illegal gambling operations that flourished in the city's working-class neighborhoods. The early 1930s brought unprecedented chaos to the American Mafia. A savage conflict erupted between two rival factions, the forces of Joe Masuria, known as Joe the Boss, and those of Salvatore Maranzano. This brutal struggle, remembered as the Castellammarese War, left bodies littering the streets and the Mafia world in complete turmoil. Gambino, young but already recognized for his shrewd judgment, placed his bet on Maranzano. It proved a strategic masterstroke, one that revealed his uncanny ability to align with emerging power before others recognized shifting tides. Maranzano's eventual victory significantly elevated Gambino's standing within the organization. Yet Gambino was not the type to tie himself too closely to any single leader. When Maranzano was soon assassinated, Gambino adapted seamlessly to the new order established by Lucky Luciano. Luciano's revolutionary innovation, the commission system, transformed the Mafia into a more structured, almost corporate-style network. Gambino immediately grasped its advantages. Power would now be balanced, disputes mediated through discussion, and the Mafia could prosper without the constant bloodshed that had plagued its turbulent past. By the mid-1930s, Gambino had become a trusted lieutenant within the Mangano crime family, one of the original 5 families recognized by Luciano's commission. He cultivated a reputation as completely reliable, discreet, intelligent, and perpetually observant. Unlike many mobsters of the era, he was never impulsive, nor did he flaunt his growing position. He listened carefully, observed everything, and learned constantly, always positioning himself for future opportunities. He rose methodically through the ranks, first as a capo commanding his own crew, and eventually as underboss. Then, in 1951, the Mafia world was shaken by a scandalous disappearance. Vincent Mangano, head of the family, vanished without a trace. His brother Philip was discovered murdered. Officially, the perpetrator was Albert Anastasia, Mangano's volatile underboss and feared enforcer, known throughout the underworld as the Lord High Executioner. But many insiders suspected that Carlo Gambino had either orchestrated these events or, at minimum, positioned himself to benefit from the resulting chaos. What remains certain is that when the dust settled, Anastasia assumed control as boss, and Gambino was elevated to underboss, placing him just one strategic step away from ultimate power. Anastasia embodied everything Gambino despised about Mafia leadership: violent, unpredictable, and dangerously reckless. His public displays of brutality drew unwanted attention from both the press and law enforcement, putting the entire organization at unnecessary risk. For Gambino, this approach was completely unacceptable. He believed that excessive visibility inevitably led to downfall. By 1957, Gambino and his carefully chosen allies had reached their breaking point. In one of the most infamous moments in Mafia history, Anastasia was ambushed in a Manhattan barbershop, gunned down as he sat defenseless in the chair. Though never legally proven, all evidence points to Gambino as one of the masterminds behind the assassination, working in strategic alliance with Vito Genovese, who harbored his own ambitious designs. The calculated murder cleared Gambino's path to absolute power. Without fanfare, without any need for public declaration, Carlo Gambino assumed undisputed leadership. He renamed the organization after himself, and under his visionary guidance, it became the most powerful crime family in the nation. Yet what made Gambino truly revolutionary was not the violence that elevated him to power, but the completely different way he chose to rule afterward. His governing philosophy represented a radical departure from the flamboyant dons of the past. He preached discretion above all other considerations. Violence, he firmly believed, was a tool of last resort, never a first choice. He actively discouraged public displays of wealth, preferring to operate from the shadows. For Gambino, attention inevitably meant scrutiny, and scrutiny led directly to arrests. Instead, he focused on constructing a criminal machine designed for longevity. His family expanded into legitimate businesses, using them as sophisticated fronts to launder money and generate steady profits. He encouraged strategic marriages and alliances that bound his family to others, forging unbreakable bonds with both the Lucchese and Genovese families. And he structured his organization with almost corporate precision. Centralized leadership combined with delegated responsibility, ensuring stability while reducing the risks that came from impulsive decision-making. Carlo Gambino's rise was not the story of a man who killed his way to the top. It was the story of someone who understood the deeper, more subtle currents of power, how to remain invisible while directing an empire, how to let others occupy the spotlight while he made the decisions that truly mattered. He began life as the son of a sulfur miner in an impoverished Sicilian town, and through patience, intelligence, and ruthless calculation, he transformed himself into the most respected and feared mafia boss of his era. His reign marked the beginning of a new age where organized crime became less about street-level violence and more about silent influence, where the most dangerous man in any room was often the one who spoke the least. By the mid-1960s, Carlo Gambino stood as the undisputed leader of America's most powerful criminal organization. Yet power never exists without threats, and one of the gravest emerged not from law enforcement, but from within the Mafia itself. Joe Bonanno, boss of the Bonanno family, had grown increasingly restless. He sought not merely greater influence but outright control of the Mafia Commission, the governing body designed to maintain balance among the five families. Bonanno's ambition turned lethal when he devised an audacious plan to eliminate his rivals, a series of targeted assassinations that would have included Gambino himself. But Carlo Gambino was not easily intimidated. Where others might have immediately resorted to violence, he chose patience and strategic calculation. He avoided direct warfare, understanding that open conflict would only weaken his empire and invite unwanted federal attention. Instead, he worked methodically, using his considerable influence within the commission to systematically isolate Bonanno. He provided crucial support to Bonanno's internal rival, Gaspar di Gregorio, ensuring that Bonanno's own family fractured from within. It was a masterclass in strategic patience. Gambino never fired a single shot. Bonanno, once a feared and respected boss, was eventually forced into humiliating retirement, his grand ambitions reduced to ruins. The message resonated throughout the underworld. Those who sought to disrupt Gambino's carefully maintained order would find themselves outmaneuvered long before they realized the trap was closing around them. While Gambino's ability to avoid bloodshed kept him in power, it was his control of vast criminal operations that made him wealthy beyond imagination. The Gambino family dominated New York's bustling waterfront, controlling docks, unions, and shipping companies with an iron grip. Every cargo container that arrived, every ship that unloaded its valuable contents, seemed to pass through the shadow of Gambino's far-reaching influence. Extortion payments and kickbacks flowed steadily, creating a continuous fortune extracted from one of the busiest ports in the world. Beyond the docks, his empire expanded into gambling dens and sports betting rings that stretched across neighborhoods, where fortunes were won and lost under the watchful eyes of his trusted lieutenants. His loan sharking operations preyed mercilessly on the desperate, charging interest rates so exorbitant that debts often became lifelong sentences. Commercial trucks filled with valuable merchandise rarely reached their destinations unscathed. Systematic hijacking became another highly lucrative income stream. And despite his carefully cultivated reputation for opposing narcotics, Gambino's organization was deeply involved in heroin trafficking. He understood the profits were astronomical and, with sufficient layers of insulation between himself and street-level operations, the risks could be effectively managed. For Gambino, moral considerations were completely irrelevant. If substantial money was available and exposure could be minimized, he would never turn it away. The secret to his remarkably long reign was not just his ability to generate enormous profits, but his absolute mastery at staying several steps ahead of law enforcement. He never spoke in direct orders, always cloaking instructions in deliberately vague language or passing them through multiple layers of intermediaries. Detectives wiretapping phones or turning informants often found themselves with little more than smoke and shadows. His operational security was meticulous, his meetings carefully orchestrated, his movements completely discreet. Strategic corruption greased the wheels, as well-placed officials and paid-off insiders ensured that warnings often reached him before investigators could act. And when the law finally managed to corner him in court, Gambino relied on his deep understanding of legal loopholes and high-powered defense attorneys to slip away unscathed. For decades, frustrated prosecutors found themselves perpetually outmaneuvered. Gambino seemed virtually untouchable, always remaining just beyond their reach. But even for the most calculating boss, time represents an enemy that cannot be bribed or outwitted. By the early 1970s, Carlo Gambino's health had begun to deteriorate significantly. A severe heart condition forced him to retreat from the daily chaos of underworld operations. He spent increasing amounts of time at his fortress-like mansion in Massapequa, Long Island, a sanctuary of refined luxury. Yet even as his body weakened, his mind remained razor-sharp. Recognizing that the family's long-term survival depended on careful succession planning, he began delegating essential responsibilities. His chosen heir was his brother-in-law, Paul Castellano, a man who shared Gambino's preference for business acumen over raw violence. However, Castellano was not beloved among the rank-and-file soldiers, many of whom strongly preferred Aniello Neil Delacroce, a charismatic underboss who embodied the older, more traditional style of Mafia leadership. By naming Castellano as his successor, Gambino unknowingly ensured that the seeds of future internal conflict were already planted. Simultaneously, Gambino faced serious battles from external forces. In 1972, the U.S. government launched efforts to deport him, citing the fact that he had entered the country illegally back in 1921. It represented a threat that could have stripped him of everything he had painstakingly built over 5 decades. Yet Gambino, ever the consummate strategist, played his deteriorating condition to his advantage. His failing health became an integral part of his legal defense, a protective shield against removal.